Today on A Word on Westerns, Don Stroud.
But Coogan's Bluff, I love that film. It was one of my favorite films. I played Riggerman, just this kind of nasty psychopath from Bellevue Hospital that took too much LSD.
Welcome to A Word on Westerns, where we talk to the greatest Western creators of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Hello, and welcome to A Word on Westerns. I'm RJ Word, and this is my NPR voice.
Well, this is Rob Word, and this is my only voice. I'm just not quite as versatile as my fine young son, RJ.
Well, you know, I can't list all the cast and crew of Gunsmoke episode from 1959 off the top of my head.
Well, there's over 600 episodes. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about the old network shows like Gunsmoke and Have Gun Will Travel. They used to make 39 episodes every year.
Now we're lucky if we get 10.
Well, I watched The Old Man with Jeff Bridges. I love Jeff Bridges and John Lithgow. And you know how many episodes are in season 1?
9?
7. And one of them was just all talk. So it could have really been 6 and been better. But, you know, he's terrific. And it's a really interesting show. So,
6 and a bottle episode.
Yes. Let's save some money on this one. But
yeah, that'd be great. They do a clip show for one episode of a 7-episode season.
Well, in the old days, though, 39, and the reason it was 39 is so that everybody could take a break and have a summer vacation, and they would get 13 of the best shows. They would cherry pick 13 out of the 39 and run those during the summer, and now they can't even do a month without going into reruns, it seems like.
Well, you look at a show like Stranger Things, which only had, I believe, 9 episodes, 8 or 9 episodes this last season, but the final episode is 2 hours and 20 minutes with no commercial breaks.
Wow.
So you've got a feature film there, really.
Our guest today on A Word on Westerns is Don Stroud, who is one of the most versatile villains that was around in the 60s and 70s. He played good guys too, but he's most known as being a bad guy. He was with Clint Eastwood in a couple of films. The first one was Coogan's Bluff that was directed by Don Siegel. Don Stroud also did Madigan, a big A-budget Don Siegel movie starring Henry Fonda and Richard Widmark about a cop called Madigan. And Don was a surfer. He grew up in Hawaii. So he's got some interesting stories about his journey to get to Hollywood. And what's so cool is when he was a teenager, he met this tall, white, red-headed surfer in the local spot in Hawaii where only the locals knew to go.
It was a giant on a longboard, but you'll hear more about that. But guess who it was?
My guess is it was Jim Arness.
Really? I thought it was Andre the Giant.
Oh, no.
Jim Arness, I guess, yeah.
After Don moved to the United States, he actually worked with Jim Arness in a couple of Gunsmoke episodes, and he'll tell us about that because he is our guest today on A Word on Westerns. He signed at Universal. Universal was very prolific during the 70s and 80s with cop shows and westerns, and Don seemed like he did them all.
A quick preface for this interview. Don joined us from his home in Hawaii via Zoom.
And it was great to reconnect with Don. Back in 1981, I did a 10-hour, 5-part tribute to Roger Corman, and Don had worked with him in a couple of films, including Bloody Mama, and we did a showcase about Bloody Mama where Shelley Winters, who had played Ma Barker in that, it also starred Robert De Niro and Bruce Dern, and Don was a co-star. And the program that I did was called Outlaws of the Movies, and Robert Walden was the host. And we have excerpts of that to run with our program after the interview with Don. I think you'll really enjoy that too. Shelley Winters was such a hoot. I thought she's wild. We're not going to be able to use any of this. And she was just magic.
Well, let's stick on our headphones. Surf's up. Let's catch some waves with Don Stroud.
Welcome to A Word on Westerns, and we are talking today to a man who has not only made Westerns, and he's done some good ones with some big stars, he also is a world champion surfer. And he surfed with Big Matt Dillon. He's going to tell us all about that. Don Stroud from Hawaii. Welcome, Donnie.
How are you today? Nice to see you.
Good to see you, pal. It's been 40 years, I think, since we did something together, that tribute to Roger Corman, Outlaws of the Movies.
The Roger Corman's a dear old friend of mine. There was Shelley Winters and Robert De Niro and Bruce Dern years ago. It wasn't one of a big smash hit or anything, but it was a really good film, and it still plays today.
Oh, it does. I think that's one of Roger's best movies as a director, and he directed a lot. That's a classic.
I did another film with him called Von Richthofen Brown about the Red Baron. We shot that over in Ireland, and that was great. So I did a couple of good films with him, and then I did Capone and Dillinger with him, and some other ones that we won't talk about.
Well, let's talk about your Westerns. Growing up in Hawaii as a surfer, what made you decide to come to Hollywood?
Well, they were doing a show called Hawaiian Eye. Now, I don't know how many people, not Hawaii Five-0, Hawaiian Eye.
Troy Donahue, Robert Conrad.
Connie Stevens and Ponce Ponce. Well, I was sitting there on the beach. I was 18, 19 years old. And Howie Horwitz, who was the producer there, said, "Can you surf?" Because Troy couldn't surf. And I said, "Can I surf?" At that particular time, I was fourth in the world, junior men, of course. And I said, "Can I surf?" And I started surfing for Troy Donahue in Hawaiian Eye. If you ever see those old shows in the beginning, Troy Donahue and Bob Connor are surfing down this wave. Well, that's actually me and another guy named Kui Lee, who became very famous a singer. And most of these people have passed away. But those are the old days in Hawaii. Now, if you mentioned Gunsmoke, I came in fourth at a place called Makaha. It's on the west side of Oahu, where the surf gets huge. Now, it's a real local place. Haole boys, which white people really aren't invited there. And here comes this monster guy, stone white, with red hair, surfing a big 12-foot board. I go, "Oh my God, that's Gunsmoke out there." He was a pretty decent surfer. Well, he went there to surf. There was no publicity or anything. Anybody, "Hey, how you doing?" Kind of autograph type of thing. He came there to surf, and he was a pretty good surfer. Most people that surf weren't as big as he was, but when he came down, it was this monster guy, stone white. I don't know how he handled the sun at all, and this red hair. And that's how I met 20 years ago, and what a privilege to do Gunsmoke 100 years later and say, "You remember Makaha?" I says, "I remember Makaha," because that's where we surfed. We surfed it was 15 feet. And nowadays they're surfing like 30, 40-foot waves, which I can't imagine what the wipeout must be like, the wipeout beach, the violence of it. But in those days, 15 feet was huge because we had longboards and we didn't have leashes and stuff like that. So when we lost our board, you had to swim. But that was one of my great first experiences with James Arness, and it went from there, you know.
So when you were doubling Troy Donahue, that was all done in Hawaii. Most of those shows, I think, were shot in Burbank on the back lot, too. Did they bring you to Hollywood, or how did you first arrive to Los Angeles?
They came to Hawaii every couple months and did all the walking down the street in Kalakaua and like different things that matched and the stuff. It's like in my camera, we'd go to New York every couple months and walk down the street, then they'd cut to the studio or, you know, to get the idea of New York. But they'd come over here and we'd shoot a lot of stuff, all surfing stuff. The surfing in Hawaii was quite different from California, and the water was a lot warmer too.
Well, then I understand that once you came to Hollywood, you were a bouncer at the Whiskey A Go-Go during the heyday of all these great acts that were coming through there.
Heyday, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Doors, The Byrds. It goes on and on and on. The Great Procol Harum, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, just some of the greatest groups in the world, the Mothers of Invention. I was Frank Zappa's bodyguard for a long time too. But I started there as a bouncer, and it was just before I started getting some parts. And my first agent, Dick Clayton, who had he had Al Pacino, he had some really good actors. He had James Dean before he died and stuff like that. He says, you want to give it a shot? I said, I'd love to become an actor. And Sidney Poitier, who became a friend of mine, came into the Whiskey Go-Go lot. I said, Sidney, I'd like to become an actor. And he says, son, you go and do it. Get yourself some pictures and get yourself a good agent, because a lot of people don't realize when you start, it's the agent that puts you in front, knocking on the doors for you. And I started out pretty good. I started, some of my first Westerns was The Virginian.
Yes.
At Universal Studios. And it went on and on and on.
At Universal, did they put you under a contract there for so many films or so many years?
$300 a week. And I was driving in a limousine. I lived in Beverly Hills. I don't know how I made this all work, because I was kind of phony in it, because I was acting like a millionaire when I was broke. It was great fun, because we were like starting to work and stuff, but it was only $300-400 a week when I was on the contract. And then when I did Tick, 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 which was a kind of a decent Western with football player, Jim Brown, they finally gave me a couple of bucks, because it was hard to become what I was becoming and going to Academy Awards and stuff like that with tuxedos. I couldn't even afford the tuxedo.
Well, Tick, Tick, Tick was directed by Ralph Nelson, who was one of Sidney Poitier's favorite directors. He directed Lilies of the Field and Duel at Diablo with Sidney. What was Ralph Nelson like on that film, Tick, Tick, Tick?
I thought it was a pretty decent film. I had a great, great part. You know what's so funny? I'm far from what you want to call a white supremacist or anything like that, but I played so many parts like that of just this nasty, nasty guy. And I had a couple of things with the black people who are dear friends of mine. I live in Hawaii, man. There's none of that crap over here. I know Hawaiians and Samoans and Chinese and Japanese people, and we all grew up together on the beach. Mostly some beautiful Hawaiian people. There's not as many Hawaiian people around as there used to be. It's kind of a race that's fading out a little bit. It's very unfortunate. But pure Hawaiians, there's very, very few. But I grew up with that group of people. But I played those kind of parts. I played these nasty, bad guys. And I worked all the time. So I could have waited. I wasn't a doctor or a lawyer or any of that kind of stuff. So I just got caught at these bad guys, but good parts, like on Hawaii Five-0 and all that stuff. They were just terrific parts.
Well, one of the bad guys you played, I think Don Siegel in the movie Madigan. That must have been a big break for you, because all of a sudden that's not TV. You're in a big budgeted movie with Henry Fonda and Richard Widmark.
That Richard Widmark was a good guy. We got along really well. That was a pretty good film. But before that, I did Coogan's Bluff with Don Siegel. But we're going way back. But Coogan's Bluff, I love that film. It was one of my favorite films. I played Ringerman, just this kind of nasty psychopath from Bellevue Hospital that took too much LSD. And I played this part, but Clint became one of my dear friends. And of course, we did Joe Kidd after that, which was pretty decent Western, pretty decent.
And Coogan's Bluff, because that ultimately it was so successful and it turned into the TV series McCloud, but Clint's part in that, it seemed like a wonderful transition for him from the Western persona to Dirty Harry, because he plays like a Western sheriff coming to New York, tracking you down. You were fabulous in that. No wonder you played so many villains. What a role that is.
Well, in those days, Universal, there was a lot of great TV too. A lot of great TV shows. So we worked a lot, and when I didn't work, it was very hard for me. It was very, very hard for me when I did not work. Fortunately, I worked a lot. But when I was out of work, it was a great times for me in life. I needed that work because, I indulged partying pretty hard. I indulged in a lot of things. And those days, there was a lot of cocaine and everybody drank. And I'm talking about we drank, you know what I mean? I used to run out with Lee Marvin. and we used to live in Malibu. And another actor named Neville Brand. I don't know if you remember Neville Brand.
Yeah.
One of my dear, dear friends. Oh, he was a tough guy. He was an ex-Marine. He was quite a guy. And we did a film over Yugoslavia with Kirk Douglas called Scallywags. It was kind of a half-ass Western and stuff. But Kirk was great. We went over to Yugoslavia. At that time, it was Yugoslavia. It's quite a while ago. But Neville Brand was in the film. And what great guys. But we used to live in Malibu. Lee Marvin, Neville Brand, and Paladin. Who played Paladin?
Richard Boone.
We all lived in Malibu. We all lived at the beach, 3 cowboys. And we drank at a place called The Raft. And it was freaking days.
Now, did you ever take those guys surfing?
Well, they were the surfers. James Arness was the surfer, but those guys were the television actors, and we all lived right on the same street in Malibu. And 6 o'clock in the morning, the 3 of us would kind of meet in the driveway going to work at Universal, which was out in the valley. But those were wonderful days, but we all hung around at a place called The Raft, and it was on Pacific Coast Highway, and those were drinking days. Good days, but they were drinking days, you know.
I know Lee drank a lot, and Richard Boone, we hear about that. I mean, do you think that that was part of being a big star at the time? Is all that fun drinking?
Well, those days were party days. I'm sure they are now too, but I've calmed down. I mean, I haven't drank in almost 20 years now. But we did a lot of things. We did cocaine and stuff like that. Not never ran them to do what I did when I got a little older, and that was slippery stuff. So that brought me to my knees. That was some very rough times in life. I was at Universal, and I had some problems with that stuff, you know. And I don't say it hurt my working as much because I worked all the time, but those are really rough times.
How did you quit cocaine? Because it's so addictive.
Well, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Is exactly what it was. It was either we're going to do this, or we're going to take your picture off the wall in Universal. Everybody had their pictures up there and stuff, and this is how it's going to be. You're going to stop this, or otherwise you're not going to work here anymore. And the word got around, you know, and I just stopped. I just stopped that day, and I quit drinking that day, and I stopped drinking that day. And there was Monique James and the Tower Universal and all that. They were all very happy about that. And I kind of went straight till now. You know, well, it was a great time, but sometimes we really overdid it, especially with the booze. You know, I mean, I can remember when I got a couple of drunk drivings and stuff like that when I was young. Now, don't forget, this is a long time ago. I'm not talking about my life now. This was a long time ago. And we were talking about Westerns. Now we're talking about a lot of other things. But those were those days at Universal. But the best part was once my contract was up, then I kind of moved around to Warner Brothers and MGM. And we did Choir Boys and all those pretty good films.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you also got to play a good guy, a good cop on Mike Hammer. That was good, too. That was a nice run you had for that.
You know, that was a good part. I loved that show, and we made a couple bucks on that show. That was finally we started making some money, because the money they made nowadays has nothing to do with the money we made those days. You know, we'd make $5,000 a week and stuff like that. Now they make $50,000 a week. So I mean, it's a big difference in the money. But Mike Hammer, Stacy Keach, my brother, talked to him the other day. We keep in touch a lot. He's the Malibu guy. We all lived down the beach in Malibu, and Stacy was just one of the great all-time people.
Well, and his brother directed you in a Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
I played the Buffalo Hunter, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because at that time, it wasn't the heyday of the Westerns, but Jane Seymour, that was a really popular Western at the time.
Talk about another nice lady. She's a nice lady. I liked her very much. It was just before her and Jimmy were married. And I was out hunting myself, but it was a great day. We shot that up in the mountains, and I can't remember where we were, but it was great because I was riding, and then I rode pretty good. The boys at Universal, the Wranglers, took me back up the back lot. We'd ride every day. It's like with the motorcycle too. They took me on the back lot, told me how to ride the motorcycle and stuff, and just wonderful days.
When you all were in Lone Pine, California for Joe Kidd, you've got not just Clint and Bobby Duvall, who are both great horsemen, but you've got Paul Koslow, who was a friend, and all of those wonderful stuntmen, too. You know, Walter Scott and those guys were there, too. Buddy Van Horn.
Walter Scott was my boy. He helped me. Talk about a great guy. He's a great guy. But then Paul Koslow was a dear friend of mine. And he passed away, right?
Yes, he did. He did.
Yes, he was a dear friend of mine. I mean, we're going back quite a few years now. But Robert Duvall, I became buddies, and God, he had a great career. So Joe Kidd was good. Clint Eastwood should have directed that film.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about that, because John Sturges gets a lot of the credit for it, but everybody says Clint sort of made a lot of the decisions on Joe Kidd, and it looks it.
Well, there was a lot of problems on that set. I'm not going to go into too much between director and actor and stuff. But the great thing that happened one time, there was a blowout. We were way up in the mountains, and there was trouble. And there was a great silence on the set. All the cowboys with their guns and sitting around. And here comes an ice cream truck. Ding, 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 up this dirt road. Clint ordered ice cream for everyone on the set. And all the cowboys with the really weird cowboys eating the ice cream with the gun here and the gun in between. And it kind of settled things down, but I'll never forget it. With ding, 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 and here comes this ice cream truck. It was so funny. So Clint bought ice cream for everybody, and that kind of calmed things down.
Now that, you know, he's producing and directing all the time, he likes a calm, easygoing set. In films like Coogan's Bluff that you did with him, what was the atmosphere of the set like on that film with Don Siegel, who was his mentor?
Well, it was one of my first times to New York. I'd been to New York with Mary Tyler Moore and George Papar. We did a thing called What's So Bad About Feeling Good and a couple of other things. But this was going to New York, and I was kind of getting well known. So I had a limousine. I was at the Essex House. I said, "Oh, look at this." I was making about $400 a week. Those were those days. They gave me a little more money for it, but it was just great. The atmosphere was wonderful because Don Siegel was top of the line. What a really, really solid guy. And Clint and I got along great. And the motorcycle chases, they were good. Those motorcycle chases were good when we went down the stairs, and that was in a place called Coogan's Bluff. It was in Coogan's Bluff, right out of Central Park there. But it was such a joy doing a film like that because I knew it was working, and everybody else did. And, from then on, things kind of really started changing. I started getting some really decent parts and, of course, a little more money.
You did a couple of films with Tisha Sterling.
There's another doll. Oh, we got along great. We lived, she was living in Topanga Canyon, so that was down the beach. We were all beach people at that time. But I can't say enough about Tish. She was just a great, great girl. I think she should have had a bigger career, but who knows? Things go. You get married, you do this, you do that. I was very, very fortunate because I did over 100 films and over 200 television shows. So I was very, very fortunate. Like Raymond Burr, he was doing Ironside. He said, "What are you doing, Don?" I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything." Next day, I was on Ironside. So it was a great time in my life. I was good. I was a good actor.
Oh, yeah.
And I could play this certain part, like Hawaii Five-0. Oh, I love the parts on Hawaii Five. I don't know if you saw it, but I played a hitman from Chicago on Hawaii Five-0. And I was supposed to come and murder this woman that it was a witness to a murder. So I end up killing another girl, putting her watch on her and dumping her in the LOI, and fell in love with the girl. But then the mafia turned around and wanted me to murder this girl. I don't know if you can stay with what I'm going, but it was a great part. Then another one I played in a wheelchair, a basketball player in Hawaii Five-0. So that show was really good. I did 4 of those, but it was nice because I came from the mainland and stayed at the Kala Hilton. And I lived right down the street when I was a kid. I lived on Pueo Street. I would look at this. This hotel wasn't even built here. They built it. And I stayed at the Kala Hilton. And those were wonderful days. Oh, those were wonderful days. But I was in the mainland already, came back to Hawaii to do it.
When you would return to Hawaii, would you see a lot of the buddies that you had growing up as well?
I hate to say it, but they're all gone. I was junior men, Waikīkī Surf Club. I was a paddler. I was a canoe paddler. and I'm the only one left in the boat. We were undefeated. These guys were Samoans and Hawaiians and really tough guys. These were tough Hawaiian kids. And they're all kind of gone. But see, most of my friends were like 10 years older than me. So we were kids, we were teenagers. They were in their 20s. When I was in my 20s, they were like, in their 60s. So most of them were gone. But these beach boys that I grew up with, Steamboat and Wada and Mudwater and Watanabe and Bobby and Choi and Dookie and Blackout and Mud, these guys were kings. And Waikīkī in those days was just the Royal Hawaiian, the Surf Rider, and the Moana Hotel. And I remember my dad had a restaurant called the Embers. My mom was a blues singer, and she married this wonderful guy. And we lived above the restaurant, on Beachwalk Avenue. I don't know, some people know where these places are. But you'd walk down through past the Halekulani. In those days, the Halekulani, which is probably the most fanciest hotel in the world, those days was like grass shacks, but these were $500 night grass shacks. You know what I mean? So that was it. Then you'd come out to Waikīkī Beach by the Royal Hawaiian, and I'd see Steamboat and Curly, and they had their Kamui boat, 40-foot koa canoe, and he taught me to surf and how to swim, and then the ladies in Hawaii was just great, because in those days it really was the coconut tree with the moon and the guy playing the ukulele with the girl dancing. It was really like that.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It was like the postcard that you see now. It was really like that, and it was wonderful, wonderful times.
Well, and your mom was a singer and with Sinatra. Didn't she tour with Frank Sinatra?
She toured with Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope. She did the USO with Bob Hope. She was a marvelous woman. Ann McCormick, she could sing.
Let me get back to your beach buddies in Malibu, like Richard Boone. You did an episode of Heck Ramsey with Richard Boone, too.
A great story. I was doing a scene in the show where I had to weep. Someone just died, and I'm crying pretty good here at this scene. I was doing it with silence. And Richard Boone walked in on a red light, which no actors do. That means we're shooting. Do not open this door. He walked in, and I think he was a little, he said, "What's going on here?" He heard me weeping. The silence was overwhelming, and I looked at him. He was off camera. I looked at him. He looked at me. I went right back to my scene. I'll never forget that. He was my buddy, man. He was one of the guys. He was Devil Brand. He was one of those guys,
Well, he was special, and he loved acting and directing, but he also loved to fish. Did you ever go fishing with him?
No, because my fishing days were Hawaii and stuff. We were in California and all that, so I was playing that angle,
Your part on Gunsmoke, after going up to Arness and say, "Remember me? I'm the kid that you were surfing with back in Hawaii." What was that like on Gunsmoke? Because it had been on for quite a few years already. I think this was toward the end of the Gunsmoke run.
This is a lot of years later. I didn't say you remember me because I was a kid. I was pretty young. But I said, "Hey, you remember Makaha?" I said, "Do I remember Makaha? Do I remember it?" It's a very special place. It's a very spiritual, heavyweight place. And it's very, very local. So white people, the surf there is a big deal. We got to surf there because I knew Buffalo Kealano, who's kind of one of the mucky mucks over there, the Heliana Oys. And we all took it from there. But what I talked to was more, we talked about Makaha and surfing. But he was a good surfer. Yeah, because he went out the waves. I would say 15 feet waves on a longboard is big waves. That's why the shortboards like Bonsai Pipeline, the shortboards are like maybe 5-6 feet. The longboards are 10 to 12 feet with no leash. So when you lost your board, you had to swim for miles sometimes because Makaha would break out about a half a mile.
Well, and he was like 6'7", so he needed that big board.
There was no such thing as little boards in those days. It was all 10 feet and above. So it was longboard days, but it was different style of surfing. It was the difference between riding a Cadillac or a Ferrari. The longboard being the Cadillac, of course. The Ferrari is just short, wang, 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 wang. Where longboard is more, coming down, I know I'm talking about surfing. I think you can tell.
Again, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And I know you've got a lot of fans out there who watch our show, and they're thrilled that you were able to join us from Hawaii. So, Donnie, thank you. And Terry, thank you for bringing him to the screen.
You know, this is a real, I like this kind of interview where we sort of just talk, not about what you think about so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. This was nice. It was a real pleasure to see you again, and I enjoyed it very much.
Well, thank you, and aloha.
Aloha, a hui ho.
Don Stroud is such a surprise every time I talk to him, and he was magic when we worked together a couple of times. He did a TNT episode with me with Mr. T up in Toronto with Nelvana, Michael Hirsch, and Patrick Loubert producing that series. We did it for 3 years, and I had different guest stars popping in, and Don was... At that time, he was a wild man. He was very interesting, and he still is, and it's wonderful to hear the love in his voice and that he's realized he wants to stay alive.
Yeah, it's a pretty harrowing tale. It's cool that he's, in this chapter of his life, become the stable Don Stroud. But he's a cool guy.
Yeah, well, people liked working with him because he was magic on the screen. He really was. He played mean guys, and a lot of times, as you know, from meeting so many of them now, that the people who play the bad guys often are the nicest.
Oh, yeah. Marty Cove is...
He's a big teddy bear,
He's a
isn't
sweet dude.
And then Morgan Woodward always playing bad guys.
No, you couldn't ask to meet a nicer person than Morgan.
And as Morgan was toward the end of his life, he was having some facial treatments done.
Oh, yeah. So Morgan was in his 90s, and I remember he kept going in for these laser facial treatments.
Painful.
And it seemed painful, and I asked him, Morgan, what are you doing this for? And he said,
I'm going to be the most beautiful cadaver you've ever seen.
My impression did no justice to that man's voice, but that sure cracked me up.
Well, he was very special. We are lucky to have had him in our circle.
Absolutely.
And we're lucky to have all of you listeners out there for these interviews, because if you love movies, if you love Westerns, and you want to hear some real behind-the-scenes stuff, this is the place, A Word on Westerns.
Okay, Father Word. Happy trails.
Happy trails, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
If you enjoy what we do here, please take a moment to follow our show and share these interviews with your friends. You can also find A Word on Westerns on Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you, and see you next week on A Word on Westerns. A Word on Westerns is produced and hosted by Rob and RJ Word. Edited by Alex Lockett and Boar and Ebor Dro. Location audio is provided by Richard Reagan. Sound design by Alex Lockett. A Word on Westerns theme song was composed by Karel Pasoda with additional arrangements by Shipwreck Music and RJ Word.